Chapter 37. Chapter 32. Eliza did in fact start meditating. Things actually became a lot easier after that. Jormy told her that Tom used to come down to the chamber all the time back when he was at school. He had found it just as hard as she did to be normal. She also sought out Severus the day after their blow-up argument. It had been dreadfully awkward, but they had quickly reached a peace. "I'm sorry," Eliza had said, shuffling her feet. "I'm not going to pretend that I think I was wrong when I was dealing with Umbridge, but I was wrong with the way I treated you. Being back at Hogwarts is just hard." Severus had interrupted, raising an eyebrow, and Eliza nodded in return. "You spend a whole summer planning for a war, and then it's just back to normal, back to playing student." "But I'll be fine, and I know you're in a precarious position and was only trying to look out for me, and I myself said some things I wasn't proud of," Severus said grudgingly, and Eliza perked up slightly. "Truce." Severus laughed quietly before nodding his head. "Truce." Eliza bobbed her head happily and started making her way out of the classroom before she paused. "And sir, you'll always be family to me." She didn't stop to hear his response, but she swore she heard a muffled "you too" before she closed the door. After that, she went to write a letter. Well, actually, she wrote two. She sent one off to Sirius and Remus, telling them she had successfully gotten into trouble, and she was also refusing to go to detention. And so if they received any letters from Hogwarts, it's because Eliza was finally living up to the Marauder legacy. She also sent a letter to Tom, deciding to keep it simple. "Dear Tom, no amount of illegal books can make up for Umbridge. I want a refund. Yours, Eliza." She didn't overthink it, not at all. She had just tied her letters to Hedwig's leg and watched as her beautiful snowy owl flew away into the distance when Filch burst through the door of the Owlry. Eliza had never had many interactions with the crotchety caretaker. Eliza had a reputation of a model student, and for all intents and purposes in all her time at Hogwarts, she had never put one toe out of line unless it coincided with Dumbledore's plans. So while the old caretaker was currently glaring at her like she had just committed some criminal offense, completely baffled her. "You," he snarled, taking a step forward. "I've had a tip-off that you're intending to place a massive order for dung bombs." "Really?" Eliza drawled, feeling distinctly unimpressed. "And wherever did you hear that?" "I have my sources," Filch hissed, which obviously meant he had absolutely no such thing. "Now hand over whatever you're sending. Now who in this castle would have such a grudge against her that they would want to search her bloody mail?" "You're too late, I'm afraid, Mr. Filch. I'm afraid I've just sent my letters." Filch spluttered angrily, and Eliza took the moment to sweep past him. Did Umbridge really think she had a chance trying to get into her mail? Did the Toad truly think Eliza was that kind of an imbecile? She'd just have to get a message to Tom to let him know her mail was being monitored. Eliza was pretty sure even their casual conversation could be classed as treason at this point. The week passed calmly after that. Eliza tried her best to take Theo's advice and focus on being a normal student, and whenever she became easily bored with her classwork, she turned her attentions to her extracurricular studies. She started studying necromancy. It took up most of her time, actually, and mercifully kept her distracted from the mundane monotony that filtered in and out of Hogwarts. The book Tom had gifted to her appeared to be a sort of beginner's guide. There was nothing in it like what Eliza had done at the cemetery, which she felt thankful for. Although her magic seemed to have instinctively known how to deal with the dead, it still left some part of her unnerved. So, to basics. Apparently, according to the book, necromancy was as much about life as it was about death, which meant it was connected with one vital thing: breathing. In fact, it seemed to tie rather heavily into the meditating she had been doing, and so hours of her week became dedicated to practicing the first steps of necromancy, connecting with your own breathing. The rest of her time, the normal time that was not the time that came from her time-turner, was spent in the company of her court. Her nights in the common rooms were remarkably relaxed, and Eliza helped her court whenever they chose to revise or do homework, and they all gladly accepted her help. It was boring, but it was also peaceful. "That's just normal life, Eliza," Daphne had told her fondly. "At least it's what it should be," Blaise had tacked on with a grin, "without your typical Potter luck." Eliza chucked a pillow at his face, and they all laughed as Blaze almost fell off the sofa in his haste to duck it. "Anyway, I'm ditching you losers," Daphne said, jumping up to her feet, tossing her blonde hair behind her. "I have prefect rounds." Eliza frowned in confusion when Draco remained on the sofa, and Daphne laughed quietly. "I have prefect rounds with Susan," she proclaimed with a wink. Blaze whistled as she walked out of the common room, and Daphne elegantly flipped him off before she walked out of the door. "I wish I had prefect rounds," Blaze complained, and Draco didn't miss a beat before replying, "Well, don't look at me." Blaze let out a choked squawk and turned around to face the blonde who was trying to muffle his sniggers. "Are you saying you don't find me attractive? Theo, wouldn't you like to have prefect rounds with me?" Blaze said with a charming grin. Theo peered over the top of his book, not even bothering to conceal his blunt exasperation. "I'd rather die," he said lightly, and Eliza burst into laughter as Blaze reeled back in mock offense. Peaceful. Eliza might just be able to get the hang of it. The next week Eliza's somewhat peace was disturbed, and not in a fun way. There's no duels or murder attempts, no basilisks and dark lords or illegal animagi. Just a toad. "High Inquisitor," Draco sneered, tossing the paper in front of them all. "What does that even mean?" "It means that Eliza is finally going to have to go back to class." Daphne cut in, the only one of her court who had disagreed with Eliza's skipping defense. "Shit," Eliza said eloquently. "Why?" Blaze cut in, reaching across the table to steal Draco's croissant. "Just because she'll be monitoring other classes doesn't mean Eliza has to stop avoiding her. No, but it does mean Umbridge has free rein on enforcing any ministry mandates. And who provides Eliza's shiny little time turner?" "Oh shit," Blaze repeated, and that was enough to break the tension that had settled around them. "As long as Eliza remembers what we spoke about, everything will be fine," Theo said, finished with reading the paper. "And what would that be?" Draco buted in after buttering a new croissant. "Meditation before murder," Eliza recited and grinned when her court snickered around her. "I feel like we should be worried that we had to tell you that," said Draco idly. Eliza didn't even pretend to be ashamed. It seemed that every lesson Eliza had this week was interrupted by the toad. First was divination, which truly, if it had been anyone else inspecting Trelawney, Eliza wouldn't have minded. Trelawney was a horrible professor and an even worse seer, and Eliza honestly wouldn't mind seeing her go. They were back to interpretation dreams today, and as there were no Slytherins taking divination, Eliza always paired up with Susan Bones, and they were both trying their hardest to ignore Umbridge's presence. So Susan said brightly, "What dreams shall we interpret today?" Eliza allowed herself to laugh lightly at the girl's energy and played along, easily falling into the persona of the well-mannered, friendly student she had cultivated after all these years. "I shared last time. I believe it's you who should be sharing the details this time." At that, Susan blushed deeply before a mischievous smile appeared on her face. "Oh, I really don't think you'll be wanting to hear those details." Eliza laughed brightly, but was spared from having to tell Susan about her own dreams when Umbridge's voice cut through the classroom. Susan wasn't the only one who rather their dreams would remain secret. More often than not, her dreams these days ranged from violent nightmares to dreams haunted by Tom. She couldn't tell which was worse sometimes. "Why don't you predict something for me?" Umbridge asked nastily as Trelawney floundered under the toad's scrutiny. The rest of the lesson was full of tension and death omens, and while that was nothing new for divination, everyone still left the classroom feeling rather subdued. Eliza wished she could say that was the only lesson Umbridge interrupted, but it was one of the only ones where Umbridge caused that much upheaval. McGonagall had practically ripped the woman to shreds, and even the Gryffindors had a hard time muffling their laughter when Severus blatantly insulted the woman in front of them. By the time the defense lesson for the week arrived, Eliza had already seen more of the toad than she could stomach. But she had promised Theo she would be on her best behavior, and so she made her way into the classroom for the first time in a week and sullenly took her place at her desk. It was only September, and Eliza was already hating this year at Hogwarts more than any other. Class started quickly, but dragged and dragged as Umbridge continued her droll lecture. Eliza annotated her textbook within an inch of its life, full of scathing commentary that they hadn't seen since Lockhart. The only interesting part of the lesson was when Granger started debating the chapter's content with Umbridge, but even then, Eliza stayed out of it. And she remained quiet when Umbridge made comments about filthy half-breeds and compulsive liars. Just as promised, she was on her best behavior. "Oh, and Miss Potter," Umbridge said, as they all began making their way out of the classroom at the end of the lesson, "you'll be catching up on all those detentions you missed, staring tonight." But even her best behavior wasn't enough to get out of this. That night, Eliza went to her first ever detention. "Good evening, Professor Umbridge," Eliza said as she walked through the doors trying to sound as pleasant as possible. After 10 minutes of Umbridge refusing to acknowledge her existence, the toad finally looked up. "Ah, yes, Miss Potter, please take a seat," Eliza did, as she was told without complaint. Umbridge seemed disappointed by that, but Eliza had already pledged that she would keep her temper. And if Umbridge found that more and more of her disgusting kitten plates went missing every time she insulted Remus, then so be it. "Today you will be writing lines," Umbridge said, sugary sweet, and Eliza stared blankly down at where the parchment and quill were resting. "There's no ink," she said in response, and Umbridge smiled nastily. "Ah, you won't be needing any ink. Now I want you to write. I must respect my betters." Inwardly Eliza snarled, but instead she docilely took up Umbridge's quill and began to write. The second she finished the sentence, she immediately felt a burning pain in her hand, and after a quick glance down, she saw the words lightly scratched onto her own hand, the words on the page having been written using her own blood. "Is there a problem, dear?" Umbridge said, studying her with squinted eyes. "No, Professor, there isn't," Eliza replied just as sweetly, and went back to writing, ignoring the pain that was building in her hand. A blood quill. Now wasn't that interesting? Eliza couldn't go to anybody in the school. The second another professor found out about the treatment of the students, Umbridge would just have them fired. They wouldn't even make it to court to testify. Their name would be slandered to such an extent no one would even be willing to listen to their claims. Eliza herself couldn't act out against Umbridge while she was a student, at least not massively, without jeopardizing her court and her house. That left contacting outside for help, but as of right now Umbridge was monitoring all their mail, anything that came in and everything that went out. Eliza could use a patronus message to alert Lucius, but Lucius couldn't act without evidence which Eliza couldn't give to him with Umbridge watching their mail. Which meant that until Yule break, Eliza was stuck. But that didn't stop her from planning in advance. Throughout the detention, as the throbbing in her hand increased, Eliza plotted Umbridge's downfall, and when she got bored of that she moved on to the ministers. It was almost election year, and Fudge promised the people he would keep them safe from dark and unsavory magic. Well, blood magic, according to ministry standards, was some of the most dark and unsavory out there, and Fudge's own undersecretary was using it on poor, harmless students. The second Eliza could send her memories to Amelia Bones and give a veritaseum testimony, Umbridge was done for, and in the fallout they could cost Fudge almost all of his light supporters. But for now, she would endure. The pain was no worse than what she used to experience at the orphanage, and she only had one other detention to serve. She could easily get through it, and she would also invest some money into the Weasley twins' new business, just for recreational purposes, obviously. The court were not pleased with her plan to deal with Umbridge. However, Eliza knew that it was their only option, unless they actually did want her to murder Umbridge, which they seemed decidedly against. Eliza just had to hold on till Yule without getting any more detentions, and then they could get Umbridge fired, and possibly even thrown into Azkaban if Eliza set the stage right. Of course, she could also just feed Umbridge to Nyctius. Eliza had heard quite a lot of horrific things about those who die via Kelpie. Kelpies have always had something a bit other to them after all. Some long-lost connection to the Fey realm that had been lost to wizard-kind for eons. Some said those drowned by a Kelpie never knew the peace of death, although many modern accounts stated that Kelpies simply eat their victims, eat everything but the liver, and allow it to float to the top of the lake as a warning. After explaining that to them, her court agreed to hold out until Yule. It helped that the wounds caused by the blood quill had yet to scar over. If Eliza managed to land herself in a few more detentions, then she might have a problem. But as of right now, she was fine. The rest of her house, however, were not fine. "Potter, come on, we need your help," Warrington whined, dramatically leaning over her armchair one night in early October. Why can't you go to Professor Snape? You know why we can't go to Professor Snape? Warrington responded petulantly. Because Umbridge has her beady toad eyes everywhere, Bletchley chimed in with a sneer on his face, and Eliza groaned. Yes, and she also has her beady little toad eyes on me. Yeah, but you can just gouge them out, said Astoria, who was sitting next to Daphne in front of the fire. Eliza couldn't tell if she should be worried about that. Should she be worried about that? Normal 13-years-olds shouldn't be that calm about eyeball gouging, should they? Come on, Eliza, just some extra tutoring for the 7th years and 5th years. I'll buy you a butter beer, Warrington pleaded, and Eliza rolled her eyes. She was never going to leave her Slytherins to flounder so miserably. It was just fun listening to them squirm. I'll need the 7th-year syllabus so I can see if I actually know what I need to teach you. Get it to me tomorrow, and I can meet with the 5th years Thursday and the 7th years on Fridays, Eliza instructed, and the two boys instantly lit up in front of her, breaking out into large smiles. If she knows the content, she says, Bletchley chortled as they walked away. We have a better chance of passing Newts now than ever before, Warrington responded, and Eliza shook her head fondly as they disappeared. Are you sure you're going to have the time to handle all that? Draco asked worriedly, and everyone instantly leveled him with a deadpan expression until belated understanding swept across his face. In their years together, Eliza didn't think anyone had actually betted on her having a time-turner. The week passed surprisingly quickly, what with Eliza keeping her head down. She had in fact approached the Weasley twins, and now she had a pocket full of fainting fancies, just in case Umbridge ever decided that Eliza's well-behaved attitude just wasn't enough. The twins had been somewhat delighted by Eliza's interest in their business. She was seemingly the only one in the whole school who viewed it as such, and had spent an hour chatting with her about it. Honestly, those two were geniuses in their own rights. Most of their family was really a dragon tamer, a curse breaker, and Fred and George were on the front lines of a new generation of spell creation. She had even, admittedly possibly against her better judgment, shown them the diagrams for the rune stones she had made last year. Apparently, they had already had a similar thought in mind, and before she knew it, Draco had to physically drag her away from the pair of them unless she wanted to be late for dinner. So on Thursday, when her quiet study session on ancient runes in the library, because Salazar's chamber had a lot of things, but modern texts was not one of them, was interrupted by her fellow year mates, she was confused, until she remembered that she offered extra tutoring. Plastering an easy smile onto her face, she gestured for her year cohort to push a few tables together. Parkinson and Davies had joined in their study session, as well as the quiet Lily Moon, and they settled in next to her court. She was thankful to see that Crabbe, Goyle, and Bulstrode had stayed behind. Eliza had patience, but she had no patience for stupidity. Okay, Eliza said easily, I've agreed to tutor you all in defense, but I do not have the time to tutor you in anything else. If you need help in history of magic, borrow Theo. Theo sighed in resignation, but otherwise did not interrupt. We'll have these in our sessions. These will usually be practical, but seeing as you've ambushed me in the library, Eliza was pleased to see that had the decency to look sheepish. We'll keep this theoretical for now. The group nodded in agreement easily, and Eliza was surprised her court were being this polite. Actually, they were probably remembering the lessons she and Tom had taught last year. That would explain it. With that in mind, it will be easiest if you each tell me your weak spots that you know you have already or anything you know you'll struggle with later on in the year, and I'll see what I can do. Eliza shot the three newcomers an award-winning smile. Let's get started then, shall we? Overall, Eliza thought their first session went pretty well as theory lessons could. And the next day she ran a similar session with the 7th years as she worked out their weaker areas, and they composed a study plan. She would never have Tom's passion for teaching, she didn't think, but Eliza couldn't say that she hadn't enjoyed her brief spell as tutor. It was quite a welcome distraction from her usual monotony until Samhain arrived. Something always happened on Samhain, and if nothing did, Eliza was determined to hold a proper ritual this year, even with a pink toad hopping around. On Saturday, they woke up to the news of an educational decree. All student organizations, societies, teams, groups, and clubs are henceforth disbanded. Eliza read out dramatically, but paused when Draco cut her off. What? Draco squawked as they read through it. Even Quidditch. Organizations, societies, teams, groups, and clubs are defined as a regular meeting of 3 or more students. Even Quidditch, Blaze replied solemnly. Mission to reform may be sought by the High Inquisitor. Oh, said Daphne, horror dawning on her face. Any student found belonging to or to have formed any of the before-mentioned things without approval of the High Inquisitor will be expelled. Eliza finished heavily. Shall I call for a house meeting? Daphne asked as they all stared at the new decree. Please. As expected, the house meeting was less of a house meeting and more of a full house gossip session. There's a lot more shouting involved than she originally expected. First the detention and now this. It's like they want us to fail our owls. Quidditch. Ministry hag in Hogwarts. What about our study sessions, Eliza? Someone called out from the crowd. Eliza couldn't even tell who it was. She'll grant Slytherin's permission right. Not when she's granting permission to me, and not when it's a direct snub against her that caused even more shouting. Eliza whistled sharply, and everyone turned back to look at her. I said nothing about not continuing to teach you. We'll just have to continue more discreetly. Eliza finished with a smirk. They all start shouting again, but this time Eliza at least thinks it's out of excitement. Between the lessons she delivered and her extracurricular studies, i.e. necromancy, October wasn't as boring as she feared. It was still unbearably dull at times, but she had her caught. She wondered what Tom was up to. They weren't able to send any letters freely, and so Eliza was left relying on the Daily Prophet to predict his moves. They had tested the mail as well. Eliza had tried to send some out to Sirius using a 7th Year's owl, and she received no corresponding post, which meant her mail mustn't even be leaving the castle. It was tedious. This whole term was shaping up to be tedious in all honesty. But at least Eliza had her distractions. Teaching was one of them. She had her 5th years brushing up on their dueling, not that her court particularly needed it, and had them focused on modifying spell strength. A good dueler was smart, yes, but a quick dueler relied on instincts more than anything. The more they became habitually familiar with casting, the better they would become. She had also spoken about beginning non-verbal spells in the next few weeks. From what she had seen, none of them should have any true trouble with it once they had done it once or twice. Her 7th years were a whole different story. Having suffered the incompetencies of more Hogwarts professors than her 5th years, they had large gaps in their education and some frankly horrible habits that Eliza had to spend the first few sessions breaking. You're still holding your wand like this is a first-year charms class. Bletchley, your wand isn't a beater's, but you shouldn't hold it in a fist. Actually, the lot of you aren't holding it properly, Eliza said upon further study, and came to stand in front of them holding her own wand for reference. You all need to readjust your grip, but it'll just fly out of our hands. Gamp protested, and Eliza had to withhold a sigh. If you think the only thing stopping an Expelliarmus is your grip, you have no chance of passing your newts. With that, they all shut up and let Eliza speak. You need to hold your wand lightly to allow for quick movements. Hold it at the end between your middle finger and thumb. Rest your pointer finger along the edge to steady it. Immediately, you should notice a further dexterity in your movements. This allows for easier attack and a quicker defense. After the hour was up, the 7th years were grinning happily as the lesson ended. They all began filing out of the chamber where Eliza had chosen to secretly continue her study sessions, talking happily with one another before they halted at the exit that would take them out into the common room. Eliza, what's with the candles? Warrington asked, and Eliza remembered exactly what she had meant to do earlier. A box of 150 candles sat at the foot of the stairs. She had meant to levitate them down before the start of the lesson, and that was exactly what she told the mystified 7th years. Yeah, but high. I was thinking of holding a Samhain celebration, seeing how it's only a couple of days away. We would have to forgo the traditional bonfire, but we can still do the ancestral ritual. For anyone who wished to take part, that is. Eliza explained, and watched as the 7th years lit up and started talking giddily amongst each other. I'm afraid we'd have to forgo the dumb feast, however, which is why we'll hold the ritual here in the chamber after curfew when the eyes of the ministry aren't on us. They seemed to deflate a bit at that and shared sullen looks. I can't wait to get rid of that toad, said Warrington, and Eliza nodded her head in agreement. You and me both. The day before Samhain, Eliza received a parcel. Well, technically Draco received a rather innocuous parcel off Narcissa, which was actually from Tom to give to Eliza. She hadn't received any letters from Sirius and Remus, and she decided to stop using Hedwig as her messenger owl, for now as last time she came back with her feathers distinctly ruffled. Eliza was glad she had placed a few protection charms on her owl. Eliza took the package off Draco and studied it curiously alongside the rest of her court. Is that from your bow? Blaze asked, and Eliza nodded in confirmation. I asked him to help with my mail problem. It seems he finally got back to me, Eliza said as she tore the brown package paper apart to reveal a simple-looking black leather book. It reminded her of a certain diary. Opening up, Eliza flicked through the pages and found a message on the first page. Dear little star, you must be terribly bored with only that toad to keep you entertained. Anything you write here will show up in a corresponding journal of mine. Now we can talk about sensitive subject matters without fearing discovery, although I doubt you would have allowed that anyway. I can't promise to respond quickly, as I find these days I'm quite busy, but I will read all the messages that come through. Stay out of trouble. Yours, Tom. A small, brief, impersonal message, and yet Eliza couldn't smother the smile that appeared on her face as she ran a hand over the leather cover. Brief though the message may have been, it didn't change the fact that he spent time creating these journals, went out of his way to keep in touch with her instead of forgetting about her the second she left. Eliza hated how giddy it made her feel. She spent the rest of the day detailing the start of her first term sporadically, informing Tom about her mediation and necromancy, and then moving on to her altercations with Umbridge and her plans for dealing with the toad. Eliza was in history of magic. Well, she was actually both in history of magic and alchemy, and no, she did not want to think too hard about it when Tom responded. She used a blood quill on you. Eliza could feel the murderous rage just through the ink and parchment. Yes, but as you can see, I already have plans on dealing with it. You should just kill her. Killing her wouldn't help our cause. This plan will. There's an odd sort of silence that follows that declaration, but Eliza just assumed Tom was caught up in something on the other side. She had no right to do that. It's just like how the matron was at the orphanage. I can take a few detentions just fine, even if it does make me slightly murderous. Besides, I've not had one since the start of term, and I don't plan on getting another. You better not, came Tom's speedy reply. And then the second I'm home for Yule, we can drag her name for the mud. Yule is still quite far away. Yeah, it is. Tom didn't reply to that, but Eliza didn't really think he had to. It was nice to know she wasn't the only one missing the others' company. Are you doing anything for Samhain? Eliza wrote as she bobbed around the chamber. Jormy was watching her as she transfigured the excess of rabbit bones into pillows, and after giving in to the basilisk's demands, Eliza had transfigured a large one he could rest his head on. The ancestral ritual she had decided on, as one could guess from the name, focused on contacting someone's ancestors, to thank them for continuing their bloodline, to connect to ancient roots of family. By lighting the candle and incanting the words of the ritual, you could fall into a meditative trance. It was a quiet ritual. They couldn't feasibly hold a bonfire, as was traditional for a harvest festival, but they could do what they could. I'm holding a large celebration for all the allies I have acquired amongst the traditionalists. Tom responded after she transfigured her 80th cushion. The bones were all a different size and density, so Eliza would have had trouble doing a large-scale transfiguration unless she wanted ugly and misshapen cushions. Oh, Eliza wrote back, and Tom continued. A feast and a bonfire like we used 2 separate chambers full of candles for more intimate ceremonies. Everyone's quite impressed with the new upstart Thomas Gaunt. He was a smug little bastard, really, and yet Eliza couldn't deny that she was fond of him all the same. And what about you, little star? Setting up for the ancestral ritual now. I imagine the hardest part of the night will be sneaking 150 Slytherin students into the Chamber of Secrets. Jormy's quite excited, though. He's not been around that many people in a while. Jormungand. It's Jormungand. Sure, Tom. I'll tell Jormy you said hello. Eliza closed the journal with a snap and a large smile on her face. Just this once, nothing bad might happen on Samhain. Her Slytherins were rather giddy when they entered the chamber. Severus had watched them file out of the common room with an indulgent expression and a promise to cover them if anything went wrong. But as her house stood inside the chamber, a somberness overtook them. Eliza stepped forward in front of them all, her court standing right at the front of the crowd, giving her reassuring smiles. Samhain is a time to remember our past, a time to honor our ancestors, and remember to be thankful towards Lady Magic for the life that we have and the life our ancestors have given us. We celebrate in secret, but that does not mean we are any less thankful for the magic and the life we have been blessed with, Eliza said at large, and smiled just a bit when she even saw that the Muggle-borns of their house were willing to take part in the ritual. Sensing that no more words needed to be said to her Slytherins, Eliza sat down on the pillow beneath her, under the eyes of everyone else, and lit her candle with a non-verbal spell, and then began to incant. "Tonight I honor my ancestors," Eliza said, and vaguely noticed everyone else moving to find and light their own candles. She waited until they were all settled, until they had all repeated her words before she continued. "Spirits of my fathers and mothers, I call to you, and welcome you to join me for this night." The candle in front of her burned brighter as everyone lowly repeated her words. "You watch over me always, protecting and guiding me. And tonight I thank you." Eliza breathed in deeply and shut her eyes as she spoke the final words. "Your blood runs in my veins, your spirit is in my heart, and your memories are in my soul. You are dead but not forgotten, and you live on within me." Eliza felt a wave of magic sweep over her. Ostara had been warm, it had been fire and lightning and spring. This was cold, cold and relentless, and yet heart-achingly familiar. Eliza felt the strange magic embrace her and felt herself slip away. For the longest time she was aware of only her own breaths and the cold magic lapping against her own, and then cold, clammy hands. Eliza felt her heart race, but the feeling didn't last for long. Instead, it was replaced with the unmistakable feeling of home, of the black ancestral magic, powerful and dark and strong. The feathery light touch of a palm against her face, the feeling of laughter bubbling in her chest, a family that is never torn apart. There was something else, too, the more time passed. A crackling fiery magic that danced alongside hers, proud and playful. It felt like her patroness in a way. It also felt, somehow, distinctly Gryffindor-like. Soon the distinction slipped away from her, and she was back in the room. She watched as her candle flickered one last time before finally burning out. There wasn't much of it left, a pool of candle wax left on the floor. "Back with us, Eliza?" Draco asked, and Eliza lethargically stretched and looked towards her court. They were all looking suspiciously red-eyed, but they looked relaxed, content, and refreshed in the same way Eliza did. "You were the last one to come back. I think the rest of the house might already be asleep," Daphne explained quietly. All their voices were hushed, as if they didn't want to disturb the strange peace that filled the chamber. "Did you meet anyone?" Blaze asked curiously as they made their way up to the commons. "The only thing I felt was powerful magic, but the others say they felt some vague impressions." At that, Eliza turned to look at them curiously. It was Daphne who spoke first. "The Greengrass line has always been full of proud young women who have been taken from us far too early," she explained, subdued. "I felt the family magic tonight, amplified by the Samhain ritual." A watery smile crossed her face. It was nice. "I think my grandfather was with me," Draco said. "He died of dragonpox when I was little, but he loved flying as much as I did." They all turned to look at Theo, but none of them pressured the boy to share. When it came apparent that Theo wasn't going to talk about his own experiences, Eliza decided to share pieces of hers. "When I first fell into the trance, I thought the magic felt familiar. What with the accidental necromancy?" Theo said dryly, and Eliza shot him a crooked grin, glad he was feeling okay. "Exactly. I got vague impressions of the black family magic, cold, clammy hands, bubbling laughter, the feeling of the wind on your face. It all reminded her of Regulus Black. And the feather-light touches, dainty hands, calloused palms. Every black woman was as fierce as a dragon when it came to protecting her family, and that's what Eliza felt tonight. And I think I felt something distinctly Potterish. At that, her court pretended not to balk. "Brash and loud and bright, screamed Gryffindor to me," Eliza said as they all finally made it back to the common room. As much as she denounced her parents, she would never denounce the Potter line. She was a Potter by magic, and that was more important than anything. "I can't wait for the day when all of our traditions come back," Draco said with a wistful smile. "I never want to go back to not practicing ever again," Blaze added in. She and her court spoke for a little while long before the tiredness of the ritual caught up to them all. One by one, they nodded off on the sofa, and in the armchairs, and Eliza watched over them with a contented smile. She couldn't wait either. She had never done a ritual like that before, but she was glad she had. And she was happy about something else as well. For as much as she did denounce her parents, she was happy to think that maybe, just maybe, they might be proud to have her as a Potter just as much as she was proud to be one.